Thank you, Dr. Hacker. Some people call the next speaker our nation's leading expert on brain health and stroke. He is Dr. Walter Koroshetz, the director of the National Institute for Neurological Disease and Stroke at the National Institutes of Health. Prior to coming to NIH, Dr. Koroshetz was a distinguished physician scientist at Mass General and Harvard Medical School. I am pleased that he is the NINDS liaison to the National Forum Board of Directors. Dr. Koroshetz?
Well, thanks very much, John, and thanks to the National Forum for giving us the chance to talk about this important message. What we're going to tell you today is that brain blood vessel health is primarily related to blood pressure. And if we can get rid of hypertension, that will do a lot for brain health. And so the brain is a complicated organ. It is really responsible for everything that we do, our thoughts, our desires, our emotions, our activities. And it's like a massive computer, and it works on amazingly small quantities of energy, but energy is incredibly important. The brain cannot work without a steady flow of energy from the bloodstream. And what that means, therefore, is the blood vessels, which you see here in the lower left, are incredibly important, and they're producing flow into these brain areas that you see here on the right in response to activity. So when you talk, or an area of the brain will require more activity, more blood flow will come. And so it's a very intricate pattern that's responsible for what you can do. And unfortunately, as our brain vessels age and become sick due to hypertension, this process really goes awry, and that has effects to cause stroke, which is damage to the brain, and actually cognitive impairment, which is probably very common due to hypertension, but is kind of a slowly progressive, kind of silent epidemic. Now, the issue with hypertension is not subtle. We know for a long time, these are studies from my mentor, Dr. Miller Fisher, back in the 60s. And what you see here is a blood vessel. It should be wide open. There should be blood flowing, but it's completely blocked by a scarring process that goes on in the blood vessel wall and leads to the blockage of the blood flow and eventually a little stroke. These small vessel strokes are what they've been termed. And this is all due to hypertension. You don't see this except with hypertension. On the other side here is another slide from Dr. Fisher. This one is a microscopic slide. This one is just a regular photo of a piece of brain tissue. And you can see there's all this whitish material. Some of these are like wide open lakes here. That's a stroke. But throughout these fibers, you can see this loss of the gray staining in what this is actually called the white matter, even though the stain is black. But this loss of the stain here is what we call diffuse white matter disease. So the combination of these strokes and the pallor of this myelin stain for the white matter is what we call white matter disease. And that's really one of the major issues we'd like to get out in front of the audience, that this is going on in many of us and is related to hypertension and is related to cognitive impairment, and something that we think we can do something about by doubling down on hypertension. And there are many different theories. We don't understand all about the white matter disease, but as you can see here on this MRI scan here, all this white stuff here, that should not be here. That's white matter disease, and it's very common. It probably affects 80% of people over age 80. So it comes with age. It's worsened with high blood pressure. The higher the blood pressure, the worse it gets. And the thought is that from this theory is that it's due to increased pulsatility. So the blood pressure, remember, the heart is pumping and you get this massive pressure when the heart contracts and the blood goes into these small blood vessels, and then the heart relaxes and then the pressure goes down. So that pulsatility, that difference in pulse and that pressure on these blood vessels, what causes the wear and tear over time, leads to this white matter disease, and then also to stroke, as I showed you with these small vessels becoming blocked. Not only do they become blocked, but sometimes they also develop a defect in their wall. You can see here, here's a small blood vessel, but here's actually a little clot of blood, a microhemorrhage that occurred due to the damage to this wall due to the hypertensive changes. And here on the MRI scan, you can see these tiny black dots at different places. These are what we call microhemorrhages. These are common. People don't know they have them, but they're signs of this really destructive process on the small blood vessel wall. Unfortunately, some of these hemorrhages get pretty big. So this patient had a fairly sizable hemorrhage. It was not fatal, but unfortunately, a good number of these hemorrhages are actually fatal. And even this one could lead to some severe loss of strength and coordination on one side of the body. So hemorrhage is another problem that's related to the high pulsatility, the breakdown of the wall of the blood vessel, and leakage of blood out into the brain, which is not a good thing. Now, for years, since 2016, NINDS has launched and looking for partners, has had great partners in the past, what we call the Mind Your Risk campaign, to raise awareness about the link between high blood pressure and dementia. And we'll talk about that later, but the main theme here is that white matter disease that I showed you, as it gets prominent, it is associated with cognitive decline and probably also dementia. So the idea here is that we know that that is related to blood pressure. If we can control blood pressure, we think we can make a dent on your risk of not only stroke, but also dementia. And now that adds to the message for why we need to control blood pressure. Now, the problem is, and we're going to talk about this, is that the best data indicates that the blood pressure that's important is your blood pressure in midlife. So your blood pressure in midlife seems to be the strongest driver. People between 45 and 65 with hypertension, those are the ones that are more likely to have this white matter disease, and you'll see stroke. So for the next phase of our planned outreach, we want to select this targeted audience, and it's Black men between 28 and 45, getting into this midlife, but it's also targeting Black men because they are the ones who are at highest risk for high blood pressure and stand to benefit the most from our messaging. But the midlife pressure problem is not just related to Black men, but it is worse in Black men. So that's why we targeted this. Now, this is a challenge because people in age 45 to 65 are generally feeling very healthy, and they may have high blood pressure, but they don't notice any problems, and they're not going to notice problems until they get older, but then it's going to be too late in many instances to really reverse that process that I showed you on those slides. And a lot of this data comes from the CDC or the National Center for Health Statistics on hypertension prevalence and the actual effects of high blood pressure in African-American men. We have done studies, and about 50% of the high blood pressure and 50% of the stroke risk in Blacks seems to be related to known risk factors like blood pressure, but there's also probably 50% we don't know about, and that's another area to try and understand what those are. Are they psychosocial factors related to race and racism, stress, socioeconomic factors? These are kind of things we need to look into. But we do know that at least 50% are known risk factors. Now, there's some data to look at a study that followed people. They started when they were young, age 30, and then they followed them for years. And what it shows here, this is your risk of a stroke on the y-axis, and this is the risk at different ages on the x-axis. And this is normal. This is somebody who doesn't have blood pressure. There's still an increased risk as you get older, but the different levels of blood pressure. This is the highest level of blood pressure. You can see they have much greater incidence of stroke, and that differs from normals at a fairly early age. 35, 40 already, there's a difference. And then from between 40 and 50, there's a huge difference that continues. So again, good evidence that we need to start early, even as early as age 30. This is the same graphs if you're looking at the blood pressure at age 40. The message is really much the same. And here what you see is the risk of death and stroke on the y-axis and the blood pressure on the x-axis. And you can see this is lower than what would be expected. If you have really low blood pressure, your risk of stroke is actually lowered. But as the blood pressure goes up past, say, 115 here, past 120, then your risk of stroke goes up. And this is the blood pressure at age 40. So once again, evidence that it's really the problems are beginning at an early age. And from the pathology slides I showed you, you can really understand that to get to that stage would take probably decades where the blood vessel is completely blocked. So we think targeting this group is really important. And then this is, again, looking at blacks versus white in pink, blacks in the bluish color. And this is studying people starting at age 30 again. And you can see that as they get followed up, there are more strokes in the black group than in the white group. And that's considerable. And that's something, the health disparity that we really need to do something about. Now, as I mentioned, this is not just a problem for stroke, but it's also a problem for cognitive impairment as you get older. So here's data from a study run out of NIH documenting that it's midlife high blood pressure that's associated with stroke, dementia, this white matter disease, and the neuropathology that I showed you on those slides. And they showed that in people who've been followed since age 30, by age 50, people with high blood pressure have actually cognitive changes suggesting they have poorer brain health compared to people with normal blood pressure. So again, this is subtle, but this is real, and more evidence that the problem is starting between the ages of 30 and 50 in this group, that they can pick it up by age 50, the effect of blood pressure on cognition, which leads us to the conclusion that the control of blood pressure in midlife may be very important in reducing unwanted early brain changes. And here you can see the data. So these are white women, these are black women, white men, black men, and the different colors are different levels of blood pressure. And the higher the blood pressure, the worse the cognition over time. So this is data that's staring us in the face to do something about. Now, what to do? So we've done some qualitative research to try and get the message across. And the takeaway points are that men, African-American men in this age group, are motivated and they are interested in healthy behaviors and feeling responsible for themselves and their health. But the doctor, relationship is probably not the best way to get this message across, particularly the way that message is delivered now. They prefer high impact, direct messages. They like discussions about health to take place in low pressure environments, i.e. not in the doctor's office, and to engage with experts outside the doctor's office. They have a good understanding of high blood pressure, but they don't feel much personal urgency when it comes to risk of stroke and dementia. They know about high blood pressure, but it's just not relevant to their health at that age. So the key is to indicate to them that this is really for your future health and that of your family. So the program that we're going to put out, we call it Nobody's Got You Like You Got You. Take charge of your health today, help prevent stroke and dementia tomorrow. And it's a campaign empowering men to take charge of their health because there's so many things that are out of your control. You could fall off your bike and hit your head, but you can control your blood pressure. And controlling your blood pressure today can help prevent stroke and dementia tomorrow. And this campaign is set to roll out next week. Dr. Richard Benson, who's the head of our Office for Health Equity, will be the main spokesperson. So it's great that we were able to talk to you about this. We're looking for partners to spread this message. We'll work with anyone who can help to get this message out that has, we think, large impact on health. So thank you very much for this opportunity.